All right, everybody. I want to introduce you to Brian Mohr. Now, Brian, I learned about Brian, actually an introduction from a good friend that I interviewed on one of my earlier podcasts. And so he really recommended that I meet Brian. And so Brian Burkhart connected Brian Mohr. And what's cool about Brian, so I first learned about you when I was listening to an Author Hour podcast on your book. You're an author and you have a book titled Hiring on Purpose. And tell us a little bit about where you were in that stage, and then we're going to walk into what I really want to talk about. But start off there. That's where I learned about you, and it's kind of cool that Brian Burkhart introduces me later, and I'd already was aware of you, but why did you do that book? And then that'll probably stumble us into the juicy part of this conversation.
Sure. Well,
welcome, by the way. Welcome, Brian Mohr, to the ROI Online Podcast.
well, thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it. And, typically when Brian Burkhart makes an introduction, I run as fast as I can in the other direction. But since we had this commonality with Scribe Media, I'm like, maybe I'll give it a shot. So no, I'm just obviously just kidding. Brian Burkhart is an amazing individual and someone I am really, really privileged and honored to call a friend.
On the same page.
Yes, yeah, he is one of a kind, to say the least. So to your question around the Hiring on Purpose book. Back in 2011, I was the senior director of talent strategy for P.F. Chang's and Pei Wei Asian Diner, the restaurant company. Yeah. And as part of my responsibility, obviously, anytime there were senior level recruiting needs, I was the liaison. I was the responsible party to make sure that those positions were being filled with the best possible individual. And I was very new to the company when the very first opportunity appeared. And I came to find out very, very quickly that the process that Chang's and Pei Wei used to fill their most senior level needs was to work with an executive search firm. And so I was familiar with the industry, but I had never been the buyer or the purchaser of executive search services. And so we went into a variety of different search projects with these very well-known global executive search firms. And I just found the process to be very, very transactional. And it was really looking at and emphasizing, does the resume and the experience match what the job description is? And, the more of a spot on match, the more likely that would be the candidate that we would hire. What was missing for me was whether or not the candidate's purpose and values was aligned to what the company stood for and whatever its core values or guiding principles were. And so I made a decision to leave Chang's and Pei Wei and start an executive search firm in 2012. I was a co-founder with a really good friend of mine. His name's Max Hansen, great guy. And we launched this firm in March of 2012. And the book, to make a long story short, we wrote in 2016-17. It spanned over a handful of months, and the book was really an aggregation of all of the learnings that we had figured out, taking a very different approach to the hiring process. And we know that not every organization can afford executive search services. Right. Many companies want to do their own recruiting, and totally understandable. So we wanted to give them essentially the blueprint of what we learned, taking a very purpose and values driven approach and holding that piece of the equation at a level of parity with the experience, education, and all of the other sort of hard skill requirements that are clearly important, but don't compensate for a mismatch on the purpose and values side.
As a business owner, and I know that I would imagine that everyone struggles with this insecurity about the hit and miss aspect of trying to pick good people to become a part of your organization. And there, there's the gut feeling, there's how should I approach it. It's another thing you have to specialize and get good at on top of pricing or managing or designing or whatever that is. And it's always been something that I know there's a better way other than just let me see your resume and then let's see if you can tell me the answers I want to hear from these questions.
It's a hiring and who you choose to let in the front door of your organization, I think is hiring's the most difficult part, I believe. That's just my opinion. And I think the importance level of who you choose to let in is one of those critical make or break factors of the company. And if I had to simplify where I think the recruiting process is misunderstood, I would have to say it's in this contrast of being reactive versus proactive. And virtually every company waits until the very last second to begin the recruiting process because either somebody just left or got fired, whatever the case may be. They wait until it's time to start as opposed to having a mindset of you've got to always be looking for amazing people. Because if you're proactive in the process and you find somebody that is a really good human match for who you are as an organization and what you stand for, you've built yourself some cushion, some time frame cushion to be able to make much better decisions without feeling like, oh my God, this position is unfilled. As a result of it being unfilled, we're losing revenue opportunities, or it's casting or distributing workload on a variety of other people that are already overworked. So, you get into this really interesting time frame game. And if there's one piece of advice I would encourage every company to do is you should always be looking for great talent, and whether or not you've got a job to fit them in, if you find somebody that's a good fit for who you are and you think they can add value, then you need to find a way to bring great talent into your organization.
I think one of the lessons I learned was if you can be deliberate about what your culture is and what it stands for, that increases your odds of repelling people who would come and apply for a job that maybe wouldn't be a good fit, and actually increases the odds of people that go, hey, I want to be a part of something more like that because I didn't enjoy the culture I was in this last time. And we always hear that most people don't quit their job because of the company, but because of their last boss.
That's right. And I agree with you. I think the more defiant that companies can be with who they are and what they stand for. I mean, what an amazing filter. You might as well just put it out there and be just, emphatic about it so that attractiveness brings the right people. And to your point, it repels the ones that are just like, well, that's just not really my bag. So I'm going to go pursue something else.
So real quick, before we move on and talk about your new company, lifetracks.me, what are the top key points in your book, Hiring on Purpose, that the folks that are listening to this podcast, they're business owners, they're story brand guides, they're entrepreneurs, they're marketing directors, and some marketing students. So it'd be kind of cool to know what are the key points on your book and in the matter that most of them need to be exposed to that enlightened thinking anyway.
So in addition to the proactive, reactive mindset, I would say one of the other things that I would hold up at a very high level also is the importance of the planning process. And what I mean by that is, so many organizations today, when they go out to market to fill a position, oftentimes they will very haphazardly think through, well, what job are we really looking to fill? And if we even take that a step further, what are the outcomes that the best person can deliver to the organization? And I just see so many hiring managers not take the time to invest in that front end planning process to really define who are they looking for and what are the outcomes that an amazing individual will deliver. And I think the best way to go about doing that, what we learned, is not only does the hiring manager need to document and think through what he or she believes success looks like, but also speak to a variety of other stakeholders, either internally or externally or both, who will come into contact with that role and gain their perspective. So if you're hiring for a position that has a variety of peer relationships, subordinate supervisor relationships on the inside, as well as working with a vendor, a supplier, maybe it's a banker, if it's a finance role, whatever the case may be, you also have external stakeholders that will interact with that role. And because the degree of collaboration that's happening in business today is just completely off the charts, to not gain the perspective of all the people that are heavily influenced by that role and ask them, hey, if you were in my spot as the hiring manager, what are the key criteria, characteristics, experiences that you'd want to see in this person that would make the relationship between you and that person blossom? And so you do this multi-stakeholder survey of sorts, right, to gain everyone's perspective so that when you do go out to market, you have the most holistic understanding of what you really need to be successful. So those, I would say, I could go on and on about this, but I would say the two things for sure are the proactive versus reactive mindset. And then second is the amount of time you spend doing the planning and research to really get it right on the front end before you even start talking to candidates. It is worth its weight in gold.
That seems like that's a great way to really focus on the upside of bringing someone into the organization. But I think a lot of organizations fall into the trap of fear of the compliance dictates from the law, which is so antiquated and so behind the times that we're in this fear of, well, we have to follow this certain process of hiring so that we're not violating any HR or interview items, and they totally miss the beautiful upside of finding a great fit for their organization.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as much as the hiring experience is at its core, it is a transactional process. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it's rainbows and unicorns. There is a transaction happening, but it's a human process. These are human beings working with other human beings that are choosing to spend their time, their energy, their gifts, their talents to build something, right, for one another, and to not layer in all of the human elements to it. I just think it's a real missed opportunity. We spend so much of our adult lives working. So for that experience to be anything other than deeply meaningful, or at least shooting for that. I realize there are different stages in life, and we all sometimes have to do things we don't enjoy doing. And it's not meaningful because there is a means to an end mentality that certainly does come into play. And as you progress throughout your career, to continue to emphasize the importance of it being a meaningful experience, I think it's a priority for me. And I guess because of my bias, and I'm certainly not alone, but I think it should be a priority for everybody. We just spend too much time doing it for it to be anything other than a meaningful experience.
I agree. So speaking of being a human and meaningful things, give us a little backstory. Obviously music, now we have a video layer of this conversation going. You can find it on YouTube and also on our website, but you have some guitars in the background. Music is being communicated to me as an important part of your life. Bring us up, kind of introduce us to you and where you stumbled into that, and why does it continue on as a valuable part of what you do?
Well, it's thanks for the question. It's and don't let the background mislead you or anyone that'll be watching this that I am somehow an accomplished, phenomenal musician. Far from the case. I picked it up about a little under 4 years ago, and threw myself into learning how to play guitar because it was a childhood dream. And unfortunately, as a result of just a variety of factors, it's something I never pursued. I just dreamt about it. And so once my daughters got to the age where they started to become a bit more self-sufficient, I found myself with a little bit more free time on the weekends. And so I'm like, you know what, instead of yelling at the television every Sunday, hoping for somebody to get hurt to help my fantasy football team and waste those 7 or 8 hours on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I made a commitment one year, about almost 4 years ago. So I guess it was the 2016 season. And I said, you know what? I'm going to play guitar every Sunday instead of watch football. And so here I am now 4 years later. And I would say an accomplished, very amateur musician, but I love it. And it's such a creative outlet for me. So music's always been a really important part of my life. As I think it is for many, many people. It's such a creative outlet, and it's just a universal language that most people understand.
Totally.
So it's been this sort of lifelong passion. And, all of the notion of if you can find work that incorporates your passion, you'll never work a day in your life. And while for many that's an elusive pursuit, I was determined to figure it out. Whether or not I have, we will find out. But I think myself and my co-founder are on the right track. So about 2.5 years ago, I joined an EO forum, the Entrepreneurs Organization, a CEO entrepreneur peer-to-peer forum, much like YPO and Vistage and many of the other groups out there. I'm sure the majority of your audience is well aware. And the very first experience when you join a forum for a new member like myself is you go through a process that they call the Lifeline process. And essentially, it's the new member's opportunity to introduce themselves to their forum and really share the story of their life. And it's a nicely curated process. And, the old cliche, you get out what you put into it. If this new forum that I was joining is really going to serve me best and me them, it behooves me to give them the good, the bad, the ugly, like really go into detail and share with them my life story. Because my goal in joining this forum was to experience both personal and professional growth. And no better way to do that than to just share the raw reality of who is Brian Mohr. And so I did the process, and it was great. So as I started to build relationships with these new forum members, one of them in particular, his name's Jeremy. Jeremy and I were asking ourselves the question, like, this is such a powerful experience to bring strangers together and build immediate safety and trust. Is there something we could do with this and bring it into the work world? Because you've got teams of people coming together who are all working towards a common goal, yet oftentimes don't reach that same level of safety and trust because for whatever reason, the workplace is still a place where we're not allowed to be, wholly ourselves. We're moving in that direction, but we're not there yet. So we just were sort of wrestling and dealing with that question of could this Lifeline process could we set it alive? Could we bring it alive in the workplace? And we kept sort of hitting the brick wall of, number one, a lot of people haven't actually even taken the time to reflect on the story of their life. So they don't even know what stories they might share with their colleagues.
Yeah.
And number two, you've got a lot of introverts and people that, just don't enjoy that kind of a chit chat, small talk, or being vulnerable and raw. So we're like, how could we do this so that there's some level of universal accessibility to all different kinds of people?
Well, let's stop right there.
Yeah.
While you're talking, I'm thinking when you said, all right, I went through this introduction process. So you thought, all right, I have an investment here of my time. I want to get a lot out of it. So I'm going to make myself vulnerable. I'm going to share. What can I share? Whereas someone like me might miss that point and go, okay, this is not about me so much. And I'm going to share, I grew up here. I did this. Talk to us about that conversation that was going on in your head, because it's valuable about where you're about to go.
Yeah, so it's a great question and a keen insight that you picked up on. Um, During the 2019 calendar year, I was involved in a year-long program, a leadership program that was run out of the Dallas area. It's called the Stagen Leadership Academy. And a lot of their work is rooted in some pretty heady philosophical theory called integral theory. And one of the through lines or the DNA threads that we focused on throughout the year-long program was really helping each member of the program uncover or connect to what they felt their individual purpose is at this time in their life. And as part of the program, I had an executive coach working with me. So I would check in with her every other week. And I would say about a month, maybe 6 weeks in, so early into the program, she said to me on one of our coaching calls, she said, "Brian, you're a deep end of the pool kind of guy." And I said, I think I knew what she meant. I'm like, Robin, you're going to need to explain, like, what do you mean? Let me make sure I understand. She said, well, there are some people in the class and people that I coach who always need to, when they get into the pool, they need to be able to touch the bottom. And then there are other people like you're like, well, the hell with it. I'm just going to jump in. If I can't touch the bottom, so what? I'll figure it out. And you're just willing to sort of throw it all out there. So it was a wonderful compliment. And so to your question of kind of identifying the conversation in my head of how vulnerable or raw do I go versus do I just sort of like hang back and wait? I think part of it is just my natural orientation, which is, listen, if I'm going to get out of this what I want, the only way that that's going to happen is if I sort of just lead with vulnerability and be raw and just share with this new group of folks that are there to help me become better. And so the only way they're going to be able to help me become better is if they really get to know who I am, my strengths, my weaknesses, my fears, and all of those things. And so,
But what if they reject you? What if they think you're weird, Brian? What if that's a legitimate
you're right.
fear?
Yeah, it is. I guess,
What if they're like all shallow people, or not derogatory, but in that example, the shallow end people, and here comes the deep end guy splashing us in a cannonball. I love that image, by the way.
It's a great question. I guess at the end of the day, I would have been forced to make a decision to either eject and just say right away, hey, based upon my values and the way I'm going to approach this isn't the right group for me. Or maybe give it a series of weeks or months to see if the way that I approached this thing could perhaps bring others along if they weren't already, thinking or leading with that kind of an orientation in their own lives. And so
that's courageous.
Luckily for me, most of them, if not all of them, I would say all of them. I got lucky. I'm in an amazing group. They are all very much deep end of the pool kind of guys.
But you would agree that fear is not a real fear, that most of them are deep end people. But we let that voice in our head say, don't do that, Brian. Don't do that, man. And you miss out.
I think we are all deep end people. Every single one of us. We are deep wells, deep layers. We have thoughts, we have feelings. We've got that voice in our head. We've got those feelings in our gut and in our heart. And at the end of the day, I think to not allow all of our humanity to flourish is just a missed opportunity.
Wow. We need a group of people where we feel safe to actually be the real people we are, which is the deep end people.
That's right.
And you're hitting on something that our society right now is really, really influencing us to not be deep end people.
Yeah, it's an interesting time in human history for sure. And, I've come to the conclusion, right, wrong, or indifferent, that we are all way more alike than we are different as human beings.
That's awesome. All right. Okay. So this is a great conversation, and I don't want to get off track where we're going, because what you've done is done a great tee up for lifetracks because I really needed to see the deeper thing, what lifetracks is going, because I've looked at it, right? And I'm thinking as a business owner, why would I want to explore this? And you just set it up so good.
Well, I would say you set it up really well. You're the one guiding the conversation here, Steve. You can't give me credit.
Okay, so lifetracks now your idea is starting to make sense with your conversation with Jeremy. You guys had gone through this experience and observed other people start to kind of come out of the shallow end because you were courageous enough to jump in cannonball on the deep end. How do you help other people start to do that more systematically or set up systems to do that?
Yeah, so it's so using sort of that I guess ideology that my co-founder Jeremy and I share. We began, and this is research that's been around for a while, and it's been top of mind for me because it's always been a part of the work that I did in the executive search space, because it's something we would always look for in leadership candidates as best we could. And that's this notion that leaders today are on the front end of creating that sense of belonging and spirit of psychological safety within the teams that they lead, so that the folks they're working with feel that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to fail forward. Yeah. It's okay to raise their hand if they don't know the answer or to ask for help. And as I think about that research, and in particular came out of a 2-year study that Google did called Project Aristotle, where they wanted to understand what are the most important criteria that lead to consistent high-performing teams at Google. And despite some of their, what they went into it, the hypothesis, what they learned after studying 180 teams over a 2-year period was that indeed psychological safety is the number one criteria that is most important to lead to consistent high-performing teams.
Did they discuss that in the book, How Google Works?
That's a great question. I don't know. But if you do so it's done under a brand of Google or a study at Google called Rework. And the name of the study is called Project Aristotle. And they named it Aristotle, I believe, because of the notion, the sum is greater than the parts, and there's some connection there, and I should know what it is.
Simon Sinek pings on that a little bit.
Sure, exactly.
Leaders eat last.
Exactly.
Anyway, most business owners go, okay, well, I want to do something. And if they haven't studied that or whatever, all right, we're going to do a picnic, or we're going to let you bring your dogs to work, or maybe go have a beer after work. But it takes more than that.
It does. And, I think all of those types of team building and team cohesion activities they're very fruitful. They're very positive. But when Jeremy and I were thinking about how do you really create lasting trust and belonging and safety, something that extends beyond going and hitting golf balls or driving go-karts or a picnic or a happy hour, which are all great, right? It's all fun to go do those things with your teammates. But how do you do something that has some level of shelf life beyond the activity itself? And that's where this notion of the lifeline experience that I had when I joined the forum and bringing that into the work world started to come alive. And the notion is that if we can, as teammates, be okay to share some of the highs and lows of our lives with one another so that we have a better understanding of where do we come from? How are our opinions and perspectives formed? What are our philosophies of how we look at the world? If we can begin to get a deeper understanding of those elements of the people that we spend the most time with, won't we eventually create better results because there's a deeper sense of understanding, of trust, of safety, of belonging within those teams? And all of the data suggests that the higher the levels of trust, safety, and belonging that exist, the better the performance. So this to me is just like fireworks, ding, ding, ding. Like, okay, now is the time to unleash humanity at work. Like, we've looked for competitive advantage in business in every nook and cranny except how do we accept the people? How do we unleash the people? How do we let them be free to be who they are? and really coalesce around this notion that we are all much more alike than we are different. And let's really celebrate that.
That's like the leader in that organization has to be very comfortable with not having to control everything. And what you're
Totally.
saying, unleash is what you're saying. Is like I had a dog, and I've had dogs where I had to keep them on a leash or they get in trouble.
Right.
Then I got another dog that you act like you want to get a leash, and they're offended because they're gonna do better. You're hitting a real deep area where a leader has to be courageous and control indirectly.
Well, and I think too, leadership today, and it's listen, it's going to be different based on the organization, based on the team. I think so much of leadership today is really all about coaching and developing the people. It isn't about like directing traffic and pointing fingers and micromanaging, and there's no genius in that statement. People today, the human journey, we are evolving as people. I believe, dating back to the late 60s, the theory X, theory Y notion around management. Theory X is that, people are inherently lazy and need to, have the whole carrot stick approach in order to get them to perform. Whereas theory Y believes that, listen, people are inherently good, and getting better at whatever it is you are pursuing is in part its own reward. I'm a theory Y believer. And I think leadership today is all about helping people pursue their own path and find their own sense of intrinsic satisfaction and motivation, as opposed to standing over them with the more traditional approach of carrots and sticks to get them to perform. So to your point, I think part of that needs to be that the leader today needs to be much more of a hands-off and guiding and inspiring and showing the way and helping develop, as opposed to, I think the world we've come from.
So here's where the connection, why you and I are talking right now, is because I believe the biggest challenge for leaders is to communicate succinctly and effectively, and to draw the picture of where the team is going together in the future. And if you can illustrate what success looks like, where we're going and why, then the energies are unleashed in all these minds, because they start going to that same point on the horizon. And I believe that every organization, that if you were to go through, most people in that organization would say, yes, I'm trying to do my best based on what I understand where we're going. But what's lacking is the clarity of where that point on the horizon is. Now, there are some in there that are they're there to trade their days for dollars and move on and don't care. But they will exit once an organization gets the excitement that it's finally clear. So I'm supposed to paddle my canoe with my energy and my value add to that horizon in the future. And that's what you're addressing. What's interesting is you're bringing in the music aspect of communication, which is universal again.
Yeah, so where the music kind of comes into this whole thing is, thinking through how could we bring that lifeline experience into the work world? What would provide the structure, as well as the elixir or the bridge or the gateway to make story sharing, personal story sharing, more likely to happen and safe. And so we stumbled into this notion of, as Jeremy and I were thinking about our particular lifelines, we started asking each other, like, hey, when this experience happened to you when you were 14, what were you listening to? It's like, oh, I was listening to, that's when I was listening to or the Ride the Lightning album by Metallica. And I remember listening to this song or that song. And, we're kind of bouncing off each other. And all of a sudden, this notion of, my life is unfolded much like a movie. And all along, there's been a soundtrack.
Totally.
And at different stages of the story, there's different music. I'm like, I wonder if people, if they could be, teased by identifying the song or the band or even the genre of music that they were listening to that was sort of playing in the background during different moments or eras of their life, would that be the type of gateway that could make this both fun, exciting, powerful, and a heck of a lot less scary for the people that, don't enjoy sharing stories about their life? So that was the hypothesis. We went into it. We did a variety of different focus groups, and it was amazing. Steve, we every single person, when we sent them into these breakout rooms, and we were using Zoom, and so we had large groups, and we would break them up into groups, small groups. And these are just colleagues and friends of Jeremy's and mine. Most of them didn't know one another at all. And so here we are with this sort of motley crew of friends of ours and colleagues. And then we send them into these Zoom rooms with the instructions of, hey, they had gone through the LifeTracks experience through our tech platform. And we said, hey, we want you to go help us test our hypothesis. Pick one or two of the moments or stories from your LifeTrack and share it with these strangers. And then we brought them back into the big room and we did a debrief. And our questions were, did you feel a sense of connection? Were you able to kind of get past the normal chit chat, small talk? Did you feel that there was a level of depth and breadth and, just really wanting to know, does this work? And to a person, they said, there's something magical about music that just eases the tension and the scariness and the fear factor of sharing our stories. And like the music made it fun and totally just okay. And so here we are wanting to bring this kind of an experience into the work world for the purpose of unleashing the humanity that exists. It's hiding in plain sight. Let's bring it out and really help businesses perform better through the common focus of bringing their teams closer together. I mean, Lord knows the world around us is in a bit of a state of evolution, chaos, transformation, call it what you want. Finding safe places right now is certainly more difficult than it's been, at least in my lifetime. So why can't the workforce, the workplace be the safest place, perhaps outside of our homes?
Exactly.
Let's do that. Every business has that opportunity. So let's do that.
I'm thinking, as you're talking, I was thinking about, back when I was younger and you get in a buddy's car or whatever, and they have their music and they're like proud to play it and we're very insistent. And you can remember the conversations while you're on a road trip or something. I want to listen to my songs now, right?
Yeah.
And you put your songs in, you're looking for everybody to like it, and they're going, no, turn that off. And it really is important, and you really do have your own soundtracks, or you run into a situation and recently the song that's been in the theme song for the last couple of years, it's A Long Way to the Top, If You Want to Rock and Roll by AC/DC.
Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah.
I just love the story in there, and I relate with it. Like you just have to work hard for a long time. It's not going to come. You're not Michael Jordan out of the gate.
That's right. And there's something super interesting too about music that I think all of us know this. And if you don't call it out, it's easy to just not remember how well we know this. And that is, music is a time machine. When I hear a song, and if that song connects me to a time and place in my life, in an instant, I'm right back there. It awakens my senses. I can see, I can taste, I can feel, I can hear that time in my life. A great example. My daughters now, one of them is old enough to drive, and she gets her license. Yeah, exactly. And so she gets her license in August. So we've been on the driver's permit, and one of the unintended positive consequences, if there are any, of the pandemic is the roadways have been far less crowded in the past. So it's been a really good time to teach a 15-and-a-half-year-old how to drive. But I've been sitting in the passenger seat, and we'll have the radio on, and every time I hear REO Speedwagon, I
Yeah.
am immediately transported back to, I grew up in Northwest Indiana, and I'm
Mhm.
immediately transported back to the state fair there for some reason. And it's not that the state fair holds some magical story in my life, but it is this reconnection. And it's an illustration of how powerful a time machine like quality music has. And perhaps the
Totally.
only other thing that has that same quality, maybe photographs or
Yeah.
videos, but there is something about music that immediately brings you to a time and a place. And we want to be able to capitalize on that because it's powerful. And most people feel it and get it.
Wow. That's so. All right. So LifeTracks. So tell us a little bit about the process that you would take your team through and yeah,
Yeah.
thought through that.
Yeah, so the original idea was greatly disrupted as a result of the pandemic. Our original launch plan was back in February timeframe, and that all was obviously thrown a little sideways. And so what we did was, all right, what can we do to help people who are currently quarantined at home, you know, feel a sense of connection with the people who are most important in their lives. And so we launched what we call the 5-song intro. And right now anybody can go on to lifetracks.me and create their 5-song intro. They can add more than 5 if they want, but the idea was, hey, if you were going to introduce yourself to your teammates, to a friend, to a family member who doesn't know everything there is to know about you, what 5 moments or stories from your life and the song that represents or symbolizes that moment, what would you share? And so we built a platform to walk people through that process. And then what you end up with is this really cool graphic. We call it a playlist card
Hmm.
that has the title of the story or the moment, and then the band and the song that symbolizes that moment. And then you can share that with, people that you want to share it with. And it's this interactive platform where you can read the stories, you can listen to the song if you want to listen to it, and use that as a basis to connect with others. So the idea is we are now bringing it into the B2B space. And I can't help but wonder if the pandemic, what its impact is going to be on what the work world looks like. Is still yet to be determined. But I think at a bare minimum, the remote or distributed workforce is here to stay, and probably at a much greater percentage than what we were pre-pandemic.
Agreed.
So the notion being that so many teams are going to be connecting through video platforms,
Totally.
perhaps more often than they were before. What are companies going to do today to create intentional and deliberate opportunities for connection that used to happen informally, perhaps in the hallways, the break rooms, popping into somebody's office, chit-chatting before or after a team meeting? Like, how do you still do those things when you don't informally and accidentally run into people in the office anymore? And so our thought is,
Because the need is still there regardless
absolutely,
of where you
absolutely.
are.
So the process is companies are still having their meetings. They're still doing, quarterly, annual, weekly, monthly team meetings. So let's carve out time for human connection. And if every member of a meeting, prior to getting into the Zoom room or whatever platform they're using, creates their 5-song intro, during the meeting, you leverage the technology, you send people into smaller breakout rooms, and you just say, hey, let's use this time as an opportunity to make sure we are connecting as human beings.
Yeah.
And share a story or two and use that as an experience, as a team cohesion experience, to supplement or replace what, the go-kart, Top Golf, happy hour, bowling experiences used to do. But I think through the LifeTracks experience, you end up with a much, much longer shelf life of impact through this. So that's one idea. which we are testing right now. And then there are a variety of other utilization cases that we think this can apply. You know, think about this from an onboarding perspective. If when hiring new teammates, you had them create their 5-song intro, and part of the new onboarding process was the new teammates sharing some of their life story with their new teammates. And you know, the leadership team sharing some of their stories. And really, I think it could set the tone and help companies define how human their cultures really are, because they're willing to be real, be human, not hide behind their job titles or pretend that somehow work and life is going to remain segregated as opposed to integrated, which, you know, I think is the reality we're living in.
So you're addressing what an area I call human experience optimization, HEO. And it's like it's the pro-human aspect of what we're wanting to build. And I think about the Colby scores or the Enneagram, or there are these existing tests that are trying to address the same thing, because the value that first you need to understand yourself, but more importantly, we also need to recognize that not everybody approaches a situation, a perspective, a challenge from the same viewpoint you do. But what's kind of shocking is that you find yourself going, why does he not see what I see? And what you're doing is you're making a beautiful human way to quickly connect and declare you are different. You do come from different perspectives, but it's fun and relational, and I think more applicable, because you're going to go, oh, you're the Devo guy, or you're the Cars, or you're Boston.
I think what's cool too that you're hitting on, I'm a big fan of the personality assessment tools out there, whether it's, you know, DISC or Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Predictive Index. There's so many, and I think they all are incredibly valuable, and they provide a blueprint of how to communicate so that your message is best received by whomever the recipient is.
Right.
What I think the personality assessments don't do, and I don't think they're designed to, is just because I know, Steve, let's say you're a high I on the DISC profile, and so you're going to be far more interested in developing rapport and really having a solid chit chat before we get into the business conversation that we might be having. And that's good. That's great for me to know that. But knowing how you like to receive communication doesn't mean we are actually truly connecting as human beings.
Exactly.
And that's where I think the lifetracks experience is a powerful supplement to any personality assessment that an organization uses. So if you were to combine how to deliver a message, how to communicate with real connection underneath, that we understand each other, we've gone out of our way to invest in that sense of trust building, the delivery of the message, I think, then becomes that much more powerful. So I don't think by any stretch we're a replacement. I think we're simply a really powerful supplement.
So true. You know, even though we have these soundtracks from our past life or whatever, if you and I were to go somewhere, let's say we go to Nashville and we pop in a bar after dinner, and there's this band there we've never heard of, and they're playing a music we usually never would listen to or pick, but it's like, God, they were good. We would have bonded there and shared this experience that we really appreciated, and that would be unique. And then that goes in the journey map right there.
Yep,
you know?
Yep. That's exactly right. Well, you just triggered a thought for me that I want to share real quick. So when we did the focus groups with this random group of folks, and they went into groups of 3 and they shared their stories, something really interesting happened about a week, 2 weeks later. I got a phone call from one of the participants, and she said, "Hey, Brian, I was paired up with so-and-so, and they shared one of their stories and the song that represented their story. And I'm not a big fan of that band or of that song, but I heard it on the radio yesterday, and all of a sudden that song took on a new meaning for me because it
Wow.
made me think about the story that the person I was grouped with
Yeah.
shared with me.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, like, again, it's the power and the accessibility that music has to connect us to our stories. And hearing someone else's song made that person think of the story that was shared. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's, and we had never anticipated that being a byproduct of this. So just a really cool thing. And, you know, if you and I were teammates, and as I'm getting to know you, you may share that there's a particular, I don't know, a Broadway musical song that's really important to you. And I would be like, man, I would have never guessed Steve for a Broadway musical fan. You know, it helps dispel some of the, judgments that we make.
Right.
And it's an interesting dynamic that just opens up a sense of curiosity that I think oftentimes we don't practice enough. So it's a cool thing.
I love that. Okay, so they would go to lifetracks.me.
Yep.
And they would fill out their 5, what do you call it?
The 5-song intro. It's you can click on the menu, or you can just scroll down to the bottom of the body and create your 5-song intro. And right now we're using YouTube. They have a really nice API, and we've I don't know, there's probably 20 to 25,000 songs that are currently available in the song catalog, and it's all organized by genre, as well as there's a search function. So, what's interesting is some people, as they go to build their 5-song intro, they may not have a particular song in mind. So they can pick a genre. Let's say it's, Southern rock, for example. Say they're a Southern rock fan, and they can start sort of scrolling through. And it's interesting, we've received feedback that having the ability to scroll through different songs helps trigger memories as opposed to going into it with a specific memory. So it kind of goes either way.
So do you end up with an email signature, or what do you end up, and how do you use it?
You end up with a playlist card that you can share through social. Right now, I've integrated it into my email signature. It is not, that's not a widely available add-on just yet. That is something on our product roadmap. So what you can do is, once you have your playlist card, if you want to share it on social, you can. If you don't, that's cool too, because some people just may not be comfortable doing that yet. But what you can do is you can invite specific people in your life, could be work, could be family, could be friends, into organized lifetracks groups. And you can create as many groups as you want. And you can choose to share all of your playlist card or just some of it, because there may be some stories from your life that you're not willing to make public to anybody. So you have individual story sharing capability or permission settings. And then you can begin a dialogue with the people that you want to create groups with, and start using it as a team cohesion, team building, or just a connection activity with people in your life.
So this is the way that you can go from the shallow end and start to float out toward the deeper end by starting to share this stuff. That's so cool.
That's exactly it. I was talking to a VP of HR yesterday and explaining what we were up to. And she's like, that is so cool. She said, right now, one of the things that we've encouraged all of our teammates, because they're all remote and distributed, they're not in the office anymore as a result of what's going on. She said, we've encouraged everybody to create a customized Zoom background and, pick a photo. It could be of their family. It could be a favorite vacation spot, whatever it is. But they're using that as a way to communicate something that's important to the person, so that at the beginning of meetings, hey, tell me about the photo, right? So people are starting to do different things to highlight humanity in a way that I don't think we have before. And so as I explained this, she's like, oh, that just takes it to a whole new level. And
Totally.
so, yeah. And people are getting together for like work happy hours and, sitting in their offices and sharing a cocktail. Well, why not have an actual activity in addition to, having a drink to organize these things around? And we think LifeTracks can be that.
I think so too. That's, my little stab at that is that when we have our weekly meeting where our team gets together, we do have this little ritual where we tell dad jokes.
Nice.
And it's just a fun way to tell a joke that's not funny, but it's funny because and just see each person kind of come and what joke they bring and how they deliver it. It is a fun human moment that we share together. So if are you taking investors, or where are you in that phase?
We are yes. I get the short answer. I always like to use more words than I need to. So
you got to come up with a song answer there.
I do. You're right.
There's a song for that, right?
Yeah, totally. With a little help from my friends, maybe something like that. So yes, we are. We are just putting the final touches on our next version of the investor deck. We've now have really solid feedback from the focus groups, and we've got some statistics of user time on site and things like that we think certainly create a better story than where we were back in February. So it's just been this evolution, but I think something I've realized, and just having the gift of all the experiences I've had, we need to find investors that are completely aligned to who we are and what we stand for. And we want to find people that clearly have a passion for being deep end of the pool kind of people.
Totally. That's obvious.
Yeah. Who want to celebrate humanity, who want to help the world recognize that we're much more alike than we are different.
Yeah.
Who want to leverage technology for its ability to really help scale and create efficiencies, but not serve as a surrogate for real human connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting blend of things that we want to accomplish. And of course, they need to be I think, a pretty big fan of music. Otherwise, this is probably not going to be that exciting to them. Thankfully, I think most people are music fans.
They are, yeah.
There are some who aren't, but I think most are.
So how do people get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
I think the best way is probably through my email, which is just brian@lifetracks.me, and just reach out. So that, and of course, you got the usual suspects like LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that. But yeah, I think email is always the easiest.
Yeah, so that's Brian Mohr. Now, usually I spell Brian AI, so it comes out as brain. But Mohr, we were hoping for it, and we got more, but it's Mohr. Brian.
It is.
Mohr.
It is.
All right, Brian. Hey, great conversation. You've been a great guest. This has been a lot of fun, and I could go on for another hour or two talking about this stuff. But thank you for being a guest on the ROI Online Podcast.
I had a great time. I agree. Great conversation. Great questions. Ton of fun. It's always fun when these experiences unfold just like a conversation, as opposed to like some regimented or scripted thing. And it's how I felt. So I really had a great time. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, that's a wrap.